Good evening and welcome. Tonight, you are invited to step with me into the shadowed heart of the woods, where silence isn't just absence, but a presence that watches, waits, and whispers. The stories you're about to hear are not for the faint of heart, and many of them contain moments so unsettling they may linger with you long after the fire has died and the lights are out. Yet, if you dare, these tales promise a rare intimacy with fear, the kind that seeps into your bones and leaves your mind alert even in sleep. Before we begin, make yourself comfortable, but remain vigilant. You will soon discover that the woods are never truly empty, and sometimes the dark holds memories better left undisturbed. Our first story begins on a clear spring night, when the moon cast a cold, silver light across the Appalachian forest. The leaves rustled in a gentle wind, yet there was an unnatural stillness beneath the canopy, as if the trees themselves were holding their breath. My neighbor, a retired park ranger, often told me stories after a few drinks. But this one, he said, stayed with him in a way no patrol report ever could. He had been on an overnight shift, patrolling a section of the park known for its isolation. About 30 minutes into his routine, he felt it, a sudden, wet tap on his shoulder. Instinctively, he brushed his fingers across the fabric, only to discover they were coated in blood. Heart hammering, he swung his flashlight upward, and what he saw would haunt him for years. High above, wedged almost 100 feet into the branches of a massive oak, was the carcass of a deer, mangled and twisted in ways nature could never produce. Its limbs bent at unnatural angles, flesh hanging from splintered bones, as if something had staged a grotesque tableau. There were no claw marks from a predator, no tracks, and no evidence that could explain how the animal had ended up there. The ranger knew, with a chilling certainty, that this was no ordinary scene. By morning, the deer had vanished without a trace, leaving only a whisper of unease that lingered in the trees. The feeling of being watched followed him back to civilization, an invisible weight pressing against his skin. This is often the nature of the woods, seeming quiet and benign by day, yet at night revealing shadows that move with purpose. It is in these moments that the ordinary bends into the extraordinary, that the familiar forest floor becomes a stage for unseen forces. Our second story comes from a time when the same park ranger was on vacation, hiking a trail in the New River Gorge National Park. It was early October, the trees alight with the gold and red of falling leaves. He veered off a known trail, curious about a faint path that seemed almost hidden. Perhaps a deer trail or something cut by mountain bikers. The deeper he went, the quieter it became. Birdsong vanished, the wind stopped, and the stillness was almost oppressive. Eventually, he stumbled upon a clearing with a structure that seemed impossibly well preserved for a forest long abandoned. The building was a church, with intact windows and a roof unmarked by moss or decay. Inside, the air smelled faintly of candle wax and damp stone. And on the altar sat a large leather-bound book. But the text was not familiar, and the symbols decorating the walls were jagged and foreign. He felt instinctively that he was not supposed to be there. Every step forward was a negotiation with instinct, a careful balance of curiosity and fear. Then came the sound, a soft creak, deliberate and slow. Without seeing a figure, he felt the weight of someone else's presence. He fled, retracing his steps carefully, and later reported the building to park authorities. They dismissed it as an abandoned church from a bygone town. But he never forgot the oppressive silence, the smell, and the sense that he had narrowly avoided something far worse than he could comprehend. Contrast often defines the fear that lingers in the deep woods. One moment, the forest is serene, almost beautiful. The next, it is suffocating, filled with a presence you cannot see, but know exists. In every story, this shift is critical. It is the subtlety of fear, the way normality bends into horror, that lodges itself in the mind. Our third tale illustrates this perfectly. My father worked as a timber cutter in some of the most remote regions of the Appalachian wilderness. These were forests that appeared on no maps, places where the road itself had been reclaimed by time and nature. On one assignment, he and his crew spent weeks clearing a path for massive machines capable of felling towering pines with terrifying efficiency. Alone in this wilderness, my father and a partner named Rene began hearing voices through their radios, garbled, static-laced whispers that seemed to speak in fragments. They first assumed a technical glitch, but the voices persisted, following them across channels and distances. The deeper they cut into the forest, the more distinct the sounds became. Two figures conversing in low tones. No other crews were scheduled, and no hikers or hunters were supposed to be there. Soon, they discovered evidence of someone else living in the same remote zone. Rusted containers, fire pits, buried trash, and eventually, a camouflage tent hidden in the trees. Inside, they found something so disturbing that it is difficult even to recount without a sense of dread. Children's clothing, rope, duct tape, crude sketches, and candid photographs that suggested predatory intent. Fear and disbelief mingled as my father and Rene realized they were not alone. Something or someone was sharing their space in the wilderness. Watching, waiting. One night, they heard deliberate footsteps circling their camper, the metallic scrape of a knife against metal. The confrontation was brutal and sudden. My father was injured, his face cut, his eye partially destroyed. Rene fought for survival as well, and the intruders vanished into the dark woods. Weeks later, another crew member went missing. discovered dead in a ditch off the logging trail. Authorities never found the perpetrator. My father never returned to the forest, and the memory of that night remained a permanent scar. In these stories, the contrast between everyday safety and sudden, unimaginable danger is what drives tension. The narrative builds slowly, almost casually, before introducing the threat, making the eventual horror feel inevitable yet shocking. The timing of revelation, the careful placement of sensory details, and the escalation from unease to full terror are hallmarks of the deep woods horror narrative. It is a delicate balance between immersion and suspense, designed to keep the listener on edge without overwhelming them immediately. Our fourth story is a personal account from a time when I was 15. It was spring, and the trees along the path behind my school seemed to stretch endlessly, a natural corridor that led from the playground to the quiet streets near home. I had made the reckless decision to walk alone, partly to prove my courage to a friend who had teased me. At first, the woods were quiet and familiar, the path littered with twigs and leaves that crunched beneath my feet. Then a sound, a low, wet moan, sent a chill through me. It was not a friend. It was a man, crouched low, filthy, and unrecognizable, calling my name with an eerie familiarity. My body froze, my mind screaming to move but failing to obey. The figure approached, leering, and then, impossibly, I ran. Branches tore at my arms. Roots caught my feet, but I moved with the desperation of pure survival. By the time I reached the edge of the trees, the man had vanished, leaving only the lingering terror of proximity. The realization that someone had been watching for some time. These stories share a common thread. The normal is invaded by the abnormal, the safe by the unsafe. They remind us that isolation magnifies fear, and that the woods are both a sanctuary and a predator. You may feel a false sense of security at the start, only for it to unravel when details hint at unseen observers, unnatural movements, or inexplicable events. And it is this interplay, the shifting contrast between calm and terror, that creates a story that stays with you long after it ends. The final story of this section takes place along a spring-fed river, where I had planned a solo canoe trip. The weather forecast warned of showers, but I pushed forward, confident in my experience. By nightfall, relentless rain had transformed the river into a churning, unrecognizable force. The gravel bar where I had pitched my tent was submerged, and trees, uprooted by the swollen current, floated like torpedoes toward me. Each second felt drawn out, the roar of water pressing against my senses in a near physical grip. Survival required constant attention, split-second reactions, and a recognition that the natural world could be just as horrifying as human malice. Only through a combination of skill and luck did I escape, leaving behind everything but the memory of terror. This section has shown you just a taste of what the deep woods can hold. From supernatural suggestion to human horror, the forest hides its secrets well, revealing them only to those who venture too far or too alone. The second story I want to share tonight is one that has haunted me personally for years. It begins on a crisp autumn evening, the kind where the air carries both the scent of fallen leaves and the hint of something unplaceable. Just beyond the edge of perception, my girlfriend Ava and I decided to tackle a remote stretch of the Appalachian Trail, a section largely untouched by hikers and tourists. Our goal was simple: 4 nights of solitude to disconnect, to immerse ourselves in the forest. Yet what we found was far from peaceful. The first 2 days passed with relative calm. The trails were steep and winding, the canopy above golden and red, sunlight spilling in through cracks in the leaves. We set up camp in small hollows, hidden from view, our tents snug against natural formations that promised some semblance of safety. At night, the forest would hum with natural life. The occasional hoot of an owl, the rustle of small mammals. Yet, as we reached the 3rd night, a subtle shift occurred. The usual sounds faded, leaving a silence so thick it seemed almost tangible. Each breath felt heavy, each snap of a twig amplified in the stillness. That night, as we lay in our tent, a gentle tap on the canvas caught my attention. At first, I assumed it was an animal, a raccoon perhaps, curious about the faint glow of our lantern. But then came the footsteps, deliberate and slow, moving around the perimeter of our camp. My pulse quickened, my hands gripping the flashlight and the 1911 we kept close at hand. My instincts screamed at me. Something was out there, watching, testing, and not by accident. I whispered to Ava to stay calm, to wait. But even her presence could not dispel the dread that seeped into every corner of the tent. We waited, frozen, listening as the soft crunch of leaves grew nearer, then paused, then moved again. I unzipped the tent just enough to peer out. The moon obscured behind clouds, leaving only dim shapes to navigate the darkness. Then I saw it, a dark humanoid form, moving with a fluidity that made it hard to track. It darted between trees, paused, and then vanished as quickly as it appeared. Our senses heightened. Every rustle became a potential threat. The contrast between our previous days of calm and this night of predation was jarring. The forest had transformed from a sanctuary into a hunting ground, and we were prey. The next morning, we broke camp quickly, moving as quietly as possible, scanning for signs of presence. Our fears were confirmed when we found partial boot prints in soft soil near the creek, footprints too deliberate to be random, too close to be coincidence. It was clear someone had been observing us all night. We had ventured too deep into a section of the trail that no casual hiker frequented, a boundary where the unknown still held dominion. The psychological weight of being watched lingered, a shadow that clung to us as we retraced our path towards civilization. Contrast, as you may begin to notice, is a recurring theme in these deep woods tales. Calm turns to terror. Familiarity twists into uncertainty, and the ordinary becomes horrifying. In this story, the forest's beauty, the excitement of adventure, and the allure of solitude are sharply juxtaposed against the stark reality of danger, of being hunted by an unseen force. The tension builds gradually, the listener's mind filling in details, crafting fear from the unknown, a more potent method than any sudden shock could provide. Our third story shifts from isolation to human malice. It took place in a forested area known for logging, a remote zone where machinery cut through ancient pines, leaving behind a trail of destruction and echoes of industrial effort. My father and a colleague, Renee, were tasked with clearing paths for massive timber machines. The woods were remote, unmarked on maps, and during these long stretches, strange things began to occur. Radios crackled with voices, faint at first, then unmistakable, speaking in fragmented sentences. They were not lost hikers or members of another crew. Whoever or whatever was out there knew we were alone. Evidence appeared soon after. Rusted containers, camouflaged tents, and hidden items that suggested someone had been living undetected. But what was discovered inside one of these makeshift camps was truly horrifying. Children's clothing, rope, duct tape, and photographs, some candid, some disturbing. The realization that humans, not monsters, were lurking unseen created a horror that surpassed fear of the unknown. My father and Renee confronted the intruders one night, a violent encounter leaving injuries, blood, and a permanent scar on my father's eye. Weeks later, another crew member vanished, discovered dead, confirming the terror that had stalked them was real and lethal. Human threat in these deep woods narratives adds a layer of immediacy that supernatural elements cannot always match. The woods are not just a place of isolation. They are a space where humanity's darkest impulses can be hidden, where the unseen predator may be a person rather than a shadow. The narrative thrives on this ambiguity. When the listener is unsure whether the threat is human or something else entirely, fear intensifies. Our fourth story tonight involves a teenage girl walking home through a forest behind her school. 15 years old, inexperienced, and full of misplaced courage. She ventured alone, only to encounter a man, disheveled, crouching low, and calling her name. The encounter escalated quickly, a confrontation that left her panicked and desperate to escape. She ran through the underbrush, stumbling over roots and rocks, her lungs burning, her mind grasping for a route to safety. When she finally reached her backyard, the realization struck that the predator had been observing her for some time, waiting for an opportunity. The woods, even when seemingly safe, are never entirely so. This story, like the others, demonstrates how ordinary paths and familiar surroundings can transform into arenas of terror. The contrast between the perceived safety of daily life and the sudden intrusion of danger is what heightens fear, creating a lingering sense of vulnerability. The fifth tale takes us to the Current River in Missouri, a spring-fed waterway winding through cliffs and forests. Alone, I had planned a 2-day canoe trip, anticipating a peaceful escape into nature. Yet, relentless rain transformed the river into a raging torrent, uprooting trees and creating hazards that moved with terrifying inevitability. Floating debris, entire trees carried downstream, became instruments of near-death, leaving me scrambling to maintain balance and avoid disaster. The interplay between human skill and uncontrollable nature was stark. The contrast between calm and chaos unrelenting. This story emphasizes that the woods are not always home to human malice. Sometimes the greatest terror comes from the natural world itself, indifferent to our presence or survival. Isolation, unpredictability, and the intrusion of danger. These are the hallmarks of deep woods horror. The tension is never constant, but it simmers beneath the surface, ready to erupt with the slightest provocation. It is the gradual build, the careful pacing, and the interplay between environment, circumstance, and threat that create stories that linger in the mind long after the last word is heard. The sixth story is another personal encounter, this time involving a weekend camping trip. My family had taken an RV into a remote national park, seeking adventure and connection with the wilderness. My age, 15, left me aware yet inexperienced, and the combination proved dangerous. During a game of manhunt with other teens, I stumbled upon a hidden path leading to a hollow where a young woman's body lay crumpled in the dirt. The shock was immediate, paralyzing. The presence of someone else nearby, listening, made escape imperative. My heart raced as I navigated the forest back to safety, every step a negotiation between fear and survival instinct. Notice throughout all these accounts the consistent method of storytelling. Slow immersion into the setting, the layering of tension, subtle sensory details, and the gradual introduction of threat. The woods are a character in themselves, shifting from benign to hostile, their depth and density amplifying the terror. Each story relies on the listener's imagination to fill in gaps, creating fear that is uniquely personal, triggered by what cannot be fully seen or understood. Finally, the seventh story of this section begins with a quiet evening on a trail less traveled. As a young hiker, I had become familiar with the terrain, the rhythm of the forest, and the predictability of wildlife. Yet, predictability was shattered when I sensed movement just beyond my field of vision. Shadows shifted in ways that were unnatural, and sounds echoed with intention. There was no doubt something or someone was following, testing boundaries. The contrast between the day's serenity and the sudden intrusion of threat was stark. A common theme In these deep woods accounts, panic, strategy, and survival instincts dominated every moment until safety was regained, leaving behind only the lingering unease that the forest had imposed its will, briefly, over human control. In these 7 stories, you can see the threads that bind deep woods horror together. Isolation, human or natural threat, sensory immersion, and the transformation of ordinary spaces into zones of terror. The woods are never merely a backdrop. They are active participants, shaping and directing fear with every rustle, shadow, and whisper. The interplay of calm and terror, predictability and chaos, known and unknown, defines each narrative, holding the listener in a state of suspended dread, eager to hear what comes next while dreading it simultaneously. The first story of this next section begins in the dense, mist-covered forests of West Virginia, a place where even seasoned hikers tread lightly. It was early spring, and the thawing earth was still damp, the smell of wet moss and decaying leaves heavy in the air. A friend of mine, who had grown up exploring these trails, recounted a night that would forever change the way he saw the woods. He had been hiking alone, seeking solitude after a stressful week, when he noticed a side path that seemed almost hidden, half swallowed by overgrowth. Curiosity, that dangerous companion, urged him forward. The deeper he ventured, the quieter it became. No birds, no wind, only a pressing silence that seemed almost to envelop him. Eventually, he stumbled upon a clearing, and there, standing unnervingly pristine among the wilderness, was a structure, a cabin, or so it appeared. Windows intact, roof solid, walls unblemished by moss or decay. He approached cautiously, each step deliberate, and found the front door slightly ajar. The air inside smelled faintly of candle wax and damp wood, yet everything was meticulously clean. On a central table lay a leather-bound book, its pages filled with strange, incomprehensible text, and symbols on the walls that twisted and turned in ways his mind could not process. The moment he realized he was not alone, fear took over completely. A faint, soft creaking sound made him freeze. He backed away slowly, retracing his steps, his senses alert to every sound, every shadow. By the time he reached the forest path again, he felt the weight of eyes on him, unseen yet omnipresent. Contrast is essential in these deep woods tales. Calm, serene exploration transforms in an instant to tense awareness. The forest, beautiful and inviting by day, becomes menacing and unpredictable by night. The interplay between the familiar and the alien heightens tension, forcing both narrator and audience into a shared space of uncertainty. Our second story shifts to a tale of human threat amidst isolation. My father once worked in remote logging regions where ancient trees towered above, and machinery cut swaths through the wilderness like metallic beasts. My father and a partner, Rene, were tasked with clearing trails for these machines deep in areas so isolated that maps barely marked their existence. During long hours in the forest, strange phenomena began. Radios crackled with faint, fragmented voices, speaking words they could not understand. Initially, they thought it might be technical interference. Soon, however, it became clear they were not alone. Evidence emerged in the form of rusted containers, hidden fire pits, and ultimately, a camouflage tent tucked beneath ferns. Inside, the discoveries were horrifying. Children's clothing, rope, duct tape, and photographs suggesting predatory behavior. The realization that human malice could occupy the same isolated wilderness was chilling. One night, the intruders confronted my father and Renee. The encounter was brutal, leaving injuries, blood, and terror etched into memory. Weeks later, another crew member was found dead, confirming that the woods could conceal not only the unknown, but also unspeakable human violence. Contrast between the supernatural and the human is a recurring motif in these tales. Fear can originate from unknown forces, from creatures that defy explanation, or from human actions that are just as dangerous. The deep woods, in both cases, act as an amplifier, isolating individuals, enhancing tension, and stripping away the safety nets society provides. Our third story takes us back to a personal experience when I was 15. Walking home through the wooded path behind my school, I aimed to prove courage to a friend who had teased me. At first, the path was calm, familiar, almost mundane. Then came the sound, a low, wet moan that froze me in place. A man emerged from the shadows, disheveled and filthy, calling my name with unsettling familiarity. My body betrayed me, locking in terror even as my mind screamed to flee. I ran blindly through the forest, branches tearing at my arms, roots threatening to trip me. By the time I emerged at the edge of my backyard, the figure had vanished, leaving only the lingering horror of someone who had been watching, waiting, and possibly planning. The woods, while often romanticized as a place of freedom and exploration, have a dual nature. In every story, ordinary spaces become threatening. Paths once taken for granted twist into corridors of danger, where isolation magnifies every sound and shadow. The interplay between expected safety and sudden threat is the engine that drives deep woods horror, forcing listeners to confront their assumptions about security and control. The fourth story recounts a canoe trip on the Current River in Missouri, a spring-fed waterway winding through cliffs and forests. Alone, I anticipated peace and solitude, a chance to escape the pressures of daily life. Yet, relentless rain transformed the calm river into a violent torrent. Uprooted trees and floating debris became potential instruments of death. The river, indifferent and uncaring, forced constant attention and split-second decision-making. Each passing moment was a negotiation with fate. Survival hinged not on courage alone, but on adaptability and awareness. The contrast between anticipated tranquility and actual peril underscored how nature itself can be a terrifying adversary. The fifth story takes a psychological turn, examining the unseen presence within the woods. During a weekend camping trip, my family and I set up in a remote park. While playing a game of manhunt, I stumbled into a hidden hollow and discovered a body, pale and still, yet unmistakably human. Panic, disbelief, and the urgent need to escape dominated my every action. Every sound, every shifting shadow in the forest heightened tension. The realization that danger was not only present but had been observing my movements for an unknown period left an indelible mark on my perception of the woods. Story 6 continues this theme, combining isolation with predation. While camping deep in a national forest, our group had sought a hidden area for privacy. Yet, that night, sounds outside the tent, footsteps, rustling, soft whispers, transformed the familiar surroundings into a landscape of terror. Lights flickered in the distance, shapes moved with intent, and for hours, the unknown observers tested our limits. Dawn brought no comfort. The footprints and traces left behind confirmed that we had been hunted, watched, and nearly touched by something that was never fully revealed. Finally, Story 7 revolves around a young hiker traversing a narrow, overgrown trail. Accustomed to the terrain and its wildlife, the hiker was suddenly confronted with unnatural movements. Shadows darting beyond peripheral vision, and sounds of deliberate intent. The contrast between the expected serenity and the abrupt intrusion of threat created immediate panic, demanding survival instinct and quick thinking. The woods, as in every tale so far, were both a setting and an active participant, shaping every encounter and forcing confrontation with the unknown. Across these 7 stories, patterns emerge. Isolation amplifies fear. The familiar becomes threatening. The human mind, attuned to subtle shifts in environment, fills gaps with imagined horrors that may or may not exist. Yet these imagined horrors often intersect with reality, human or otherwise, producing a sense of dread that is both visceral and cognitive. Listeners are drawn in by careful pacing, gradual escalation, and contrast between calm and crisis. Each story relies on sensory details, shadows, and timing to maximize fear, creating an immersive experience that lingers long after the tale ends. As we conclude this section, it is important to notice how storytelling itself becomes a tool of fear. By carefully layering sensory input, building anticipation, and manipulating contrast, a narrator can transport listeners into the deep woods without ever leaving their chair. The forest becomes more than setting. It is a living, breathing entity, capable of shaping perception and invoking terror. These 7 stories are proof that fear is not simply about monsters or human predators, but about the uncertainty of what lies just beyond vision, just beyond understanding, in a place where shadows move with intent and silence speaks with authority. The final section of our journey into the deep woods begins with a story that combines both human unpredictability and the raw power of nature. It was early April, a time when the woods are in transition. New leaves struggling to unfold, the earth still damp from melting snow, and streams swollen with runoff. I had planned a solo canoe trip down the Current River in Missouri. Seeking peace and solitude, the river was calm at first, just a gentle ripple, sunlight glinting off the surface, reflecting the surrounding cliffs and thick green forests. But nature, as we've seen in these tales, is indifferent to human plans. By the second night, relentless rain had transformed the river into a fast-moving torrent. What had been a serene, navigable waterway became a channel of chaos. Trees uprooted from distant banks floated downstream like deadly missiles. Entire clusters of branches collided, sending shock waves through the water. I scrambled to maintain control, paddling with all my strength. Each maneuver a negotiation with forces far beyond my power. The beauty of the forest now contrasted sharply with the immediate threat. The same elements that had drawn me here were now instruments of survival, indifferent and unyielding. It was in these moments, paddling amidst floating trees and uprooted debris, that I realized the woods are never simply a backdrop. They are active, alive, unpredictable participants in every story. Contrast, again, becomes a crucial tool. Peace versus chaos, expectation versus reality, beauty versus terror. Survival demands more than courage. It requires awareness, adaptability, and respect for the unknown. By the time dawn broke, the forest had reclaimed much of what had been disturbed, but the psychological impact lingered. The woods were unchanged in appearance, yet they had revealed a truth. No plan, no preparation could fully protect one from the unpredictability of the natural world. The second story in this final section moves back to human threat, the kind that lingers long after the encounter. It took place during a family camping trip in the deep woods. At 15, I was eager to prove bravery, and a game of manhunt offered the perfect opportunity. What began as innocent play quickly turned sinister. While exploring a hidden path, I stumbled into a small hollow where a young woman's body lay crumpled, pale, and still. My immediate reaction was panic, a primal urge to flee. Yet, the presence of an unseen observer intensified the terror. The sounds of footsteps, soft and deliberate, heightened every sense, forcing me to navigate the woods under extreme psychological pressure. This story highlights a recurring theme in deep woods horror. The woods are both setting and participant. Isolation amplifies fear, and human perception fills the unknown with imagined horrors that may well be real. Every snap of a twig, every shadow between trees becomes a potential threat. By layering sensory details and building anticipation, the narrator ensures the listener is fully immersed, their mind filling gaps with personalized terror. The contrast between what is seen and what is imagined, between perceived safety and sudden danger, sustains tension, and keeps the audience on edge. The third tale revolves around an RV trip with my family. We had traveled deep into the wilderness for adventure, but the night revealed how quickly ordinary surroundings can transform into zones of terror. A hidden loft above our garage became the lair of a human predator, someone living just yards from our sleeping quarters. The discovery of blankets, wrappers, and other signs of habitation was horrifying enough, but the proximity to our family amplified the fear. The predator had observed us, learned our patterns, and waited for opportunity. This is a story of human malice hidden within the natural world, demonstrating that the woods do not merely conceal wildlife. They can harbor the darkest aspects of human behavior. Contrast in these narratives is essential. The setting, a family campsite meant for leisure, becomes a locus of horror. The familiarity of home, juxtaposed with the intrusion of danger, highlights the fragility of safety. Every moment in the woods carries potential for revelation. Beauty and terror coexist, often indistinguishable until danger presents itself. This tension, the uncertainty between comfort and threat, is the heartbeat of deep woods storytelling. Our fourth story brings us back to the interplay between isolation and survival instinct. It recounts a solo hike along a trail that had long been familiar. Yet, even familiarity could not dispel the rising dread when unnatural sounds began to echo through the forest. Branches snapped with intent, shadows shifted unnaturally, and the air itself seemed to carry a weight that pressed down on the senses. Each step required vigilance. Each sound prompted immediate attention. Survival depended not just on physical ability, but on the ability to interpret signals, to distinguish between normal wildlife behavior and the deliberate movement of an unknown observer. The fifth story delves into the supernatural ambiguity that often laces deep woods horror. While hiking a remote section of the Appalachian Trail, my companion and I observed lights flickering through dense trees in the dead of night. Shadows moved in ways that defied simple explanation. Shapes darted between trees, sometimes visible, sometimes vanishing into nothing. It was unclear whether the threat was human, animal, or something entirely unearthly. The uncertainty itself fueled terror. By leaving questions unanswered, these stories allow the listener's imagination to fill gaps, personalizing the fear and making it far more potent than any explicit description could achieve. Contrast remains a cornerstone. Daylight, familiarity, and the expected calm of hiking are upended by darkness, unpredictability, and the unknown. The woods themselves, neutral in intent, become an active force shaping fear. Every rustle, every unexplained light, every shift in shadow reinforces the notion that safety is provisional, that the unknown may be waiting just beyond the edge of perception. Listeners are drawn into this liminal space, experiencing vicariously the tension, adrenaline, and suspense of the narrator. The sixth story addresses psychological tension intertwined with physical threat. While camping, the simple act of settling in for the night became a crucible for fear. The presence of unseen watchers, deliberate manipulation of the environment by unknown individuals, and subtle auditory cues created an atmosphere of constant anxiety. The story emphasizes anticipation over immediate danger. The fear is not simply in the act itself, but in the prolonged suspense, the uncertainty of when or how the threat might manifest. The woods, in these narratives, serve as a stage for tension, a canvas upon which fear is painted with subtlety and precision. Finally, the seventh story in this section, our last tale, returns to the theme of nature's indifferent power. Hiking along a narrow trail, I encountered movements and sounds that seemed unnatural, as if the forest itself were aware of my presence. Shapes shifted in peripheral vision, rustling echoed with purpose, and the forest pressed in from all sides. The hiker's reaction, heightened alertness, careful foot placement, and constant scanning of surroundings illustrates the human response to ambiguous threat. The woods, dense and unyielding, become a crucible in which fear is amplified, instincts sharpened, and survival instincts tested to their limits. Across all these stories, several patterns crystallize. Isolation magnifies vulnerability. Contrast between calm and danger sharpens perception and ambiguity. The unknown lurking just out of sight sustains tension. The forests are not mere settings. They are active participants, shaping the narrative, controlling pace, and defining stakes. Sensory immersion, careful pacing, and strategic contrast between serenity and peril are what make deep woods horror compelling. Listeners are drawn into the environment, experiencing events almost physically, imagining each rustle, shadow, and whispered sound. As we conclude this series of 7 true, disturbing deep woods stories, it becomes clear that these tales are more than simple recounting of events. They are exercises in psychological engagement, leveraging anticipation, sensory detail, and contrast to elicit sustained fear. Each story, whether rooted in natural danger, human malevolence, or ambiguous supernatural threat, contributes to a cohesive tapestry of terror. The woods are alive in every tale, indifferent, imposing, and endlessly mysterious. So, as you settle in tonight, perhaps with the lights low and the shadows stretching across your walls, remember this: the deep woods are never empty. Every rustle of leaves, every crack of a branch, every shadow cast by the moon carries the potential for fear. Whether through human malice, natural hazard, or the sheer unknown, the stories remind us that isolation is not always safety, and beauty can swiftly transform into menace. Keep your senses sharp, your mind alert, and your imagination ready, because in the deep woods, danger may be closer than it appears.